Are you trying to deploy Apigee X but hung up on the network connectivity options? Need to make a decision between a peering versus private service connect deployment? In this video, we'll talk about the connectivity patterns for northbound and southbound Apigee X routing and gotchas to consider when making your networking decisions. First, let's quickly review what is Apigee and why is it a helpful product. Apigee is Google Cloud's native API management platform that can be used to build, manage, and secure APIs for any use case. Apigee offers high-performance API proxies to create a consistent and reliable interface for your backend services. Apigee X is a Google Cloud infrastructure managed service. It is deployed in a dedicated Google-managed VPC, and you can use Private Service Connect, VPC Peering, or both to connect it to your network. What do I mean by both? Apigee has network patterns for northbound, traffic to Apigee, and southbound, traffic from Apigee, and you can use a combination of those network patterns to route traffic. Let's start by reviewing the most common northbound Apigee network patterns. If using PSC, you can choose to connect via an application load balancer with a PSC neg connected to the Apigee provided service attachment. The load balancer could be external or internal, and global, regional, or cross-regional, depending on the traffic pattern. By using an application load balancer, you can bring your own certificate for use with establishing connections to Apigee. You could also connect via a PSC endpoint directly. However, this is only for internal traffic patterns, and you need to use the Apigee-provided self-signed certificate. If using VPC peering, a similar pattern exists using a load balancer with a network bridge running a proxy. The load balancer could again be external or internal, and global, regional, or cross-regional. Now onto the southbound patterns. There are two patterns that exist regardless of whether you choose PSC or VPC peering. The first pertains to internet egress. Apigee can egress directly to API targets on the internet via CloudNAT in the Apigee tenant VPC. This will use a known IP address that you can use for destination firewalls should you need it. The second pattern pertains to Google API destinations. If you are using Apigee to call Google API-based services like Gemini or BigQuery, private Google access is configured in the Apigee tenant VPC, and Apigee will make calls directly to these APIs. If using PSC only, API targets must be exposed as producer services. You'll need to front your APIs with an internal load balancer. The flavor of load balancer doesn't matter, just as long as the region matches the region where you have Apigee deployed. Then, expose the service via a service attachment with a PSC NAT subnet. In Apigee, configure an endpoint attachment to point to the service attachment. Behind the load balancer, your API target can be any type of compute, serverless neg, PSC neg, or even a hybrid neg to point to API targets that may be located on-prem or in another public cloud. Just make sure that the backend type is compatible with the load balancer you choose. The scaling of this pattern can get quite complex, so consider using the URL map of an application load balancer to expose more than one API target on a single load balancer. If you find scaling of this pattern too difficult, another PSC-only option is to deploy a secure web proxy in your NCC environment. Expose your secure web proxy through a service attachment, configure an endpoint attachment in Apigee, and set an Apigee global forward proxy to point to this endpoint attachment. Secure web proxy will now proxy all traffic coming from Apigee and will use DNS in the VPC where secure web proxy is deployed to send traffic to the API target destination. This option simplifies the routing overhead into a single southbound service setup. Moving on to VPC peering southbound patterns. It's very important to remember that you must configure Apigee as a producer spoke on the NCC hub. This will ensure that NCC will propagate all routes from the Apigee tenant VPC. With producer spoke configured, Apigee can route to any type of API target in any VPC, whether it be a compute engine VM, a service exposed by a load balancer, or even directly to services on-prem or in other public clouds connected via interconnects or VPNs. What are the implications of choosing PSC versus VPC peering, or even both, for Apigee? The first thing to consider is IP consumption. For peering-based connectivity, Apigee requires a /22 and /28 CIDRs per instance. These ranges must be unique across your entire connected network. Using PSC completely eliminates IP overlap complexity. The second factor is routing operational overhead. Setting up a PSC producer service per API target can introduce a lot of toil. Because VPC Peering uses direct routing, it eliminates that toil, but at the expense of high IP consumption. The third factor is cost. The PSC with Secure Web Proxy's Southbound connectivity model is a great option if you need to preserve IP space and want to simplify routing operational overhead, but it does introduce additional costs. One important detail to call out that at one point was a key decision factor, but isn't anymore, is DNS peering. Until recently, DNS peering was not supported for the PSC deployment of Apigee. This is no longer the case. PSC and VPC peering options both support DNS peering. Let's finish up with our key takeaways. First, it's up to you to determine what's most important in your unique Apigee deployment for choosing between PSC, VPC peering, or a combination of both. Once you've decided on your deployment options, understand your northbound network patterns and deploy the best network components for your patterns. Think about internal versus external, regional requirements, and failover patterns. Lastly, determine the southbound network patterns that are appropriate for where your target APIs are hosted. Think about if they are on the internet, a Google API, an API hosted in a Google VPC, or an API hosted in an on-prem or multi-cloud environment. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the docs in the description for more info on all your Apigee needs. See you next time.